Okay, you're good.
Okay, well, welcome back to our last 3 sessions. This afternoon, we've got a session on seabirds, glaciers, and killer whales. So a lot of information coming up for you. So stay tuned. I'm going to introduce Robb Kaler, who is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist on Migratory Bird Management Office. Robb is going to talk about Alaska Ocean Sentinels, seabirds as ecosystem indicators in Prince William Sound. Robb is a wildlife biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, Migratory Bird Management Office based in Anchorage, and leads several projects in Prince William Sound, including monitoring population trends of marine birds following the 1989 oil spill, studying the recovery of pigeon guillemots in Naked Island after the introduction of mink. And Robb also administrates the North Pacific Seabird Colony Register and coordinates the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's response to unusual mortality events of seabirds in Alaska, which have occurred annually since 2015. When not counting birds, Robb enjoys getting outdoors with his wife and German bird dog, Otto. So Robb, I know we've worked together a couple of times on some of these projects, so it's nice to see you here. I'm going to get out of the way and let you take it over. We'll probably give you just a little 5-minute warning, just maybe a couple extra minutes, because I'm sure there will be questions. So thanks, Robb.
All right. Let's see here. I think I'm going to share my screen. Make sure I share the right one. All right. I think I'm sharing my screen now. So yeah. So David Irons was my boss, retired a few years ago, but essentially he did this presentation to the Prince William Sound Natural History Symposium last year. So hopefully I do at least a half of a good job as David did. So I will see if I can click through this. So this is kind of just in case this is saved. As was mentioned, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been responsible for the Prince William Sound Marine Bird Survey. I follow up to the Exxon Valdez, and then I also have worked with lazy otter charters doing some Naked Island mink removal and restoration and study of pigeon guillemots there. And then I've also been coordinating seabird die-offs, which in 2015, 2016 were pretty major event in the Gulf of Alaska, seen all the way in Prince William Sound. So this, of course, is a tufted puffin. This is probably one of our most attractive seabirds. It's kind of the Harley Davidson of seabirds, if you will. It's got the nice white plumes, leather clad, quite an attractive bird. And in general, when I talk about seabirds, I usually back it out to what I consider the marine birds. And so I refer to the survey that I lead every July or every other July in Prince William Sound as a marine bird survey. And so when we talk about marine birds, we're talking about a broader group of birds, all the way from yellow-billed loon up there in the upper left, harlequin ducks in the center there, mergansers, guillemots, and so it's a broad group of birds. And so we monitor all of them, and we use these as indicators of the health of the marine ecosystem. And so just as a broad background, the types of birds range from everything from the penguins, and I've included a Gary Larson cartoon up in the upper right corner of this slide. You don't really get polar bears with penguins, but it makes quite an impression. And so I mention it there, so it would have been better if it were common murres, perhaps. So, and then the Procelliforms, which are kind of the ocean wanderers. Essentially, these are the tube noses. These are great birds to be able to see in Prince William Sound, and they wander very far. The Pelecaniforms, the cormorants, and pelicans. There's other birds in this group, but we'll see cormorants in Prince William Sound. And then the Charadriforms, those are kind of the larger. And so one thing to point out, I guess there's no such thing as a gull. A seagull. So gulls, terns, and auks, and then those auks are really the puffins and murres. So these gulls, terns, and auks really are kind of one of the more abundant birds that we can find in Prince William Sound, and definitely on the outer edges of it. And so generally working for Fish and Wildlife Service and Migratory Bird Management as a seabird specialist, we often have to remind our supervisors and leadership why seabirds are so important. And so one of the one of the really interesting things to me about seabirds is their life history. And so I've added this quotation in the lower right, but basically all the bullets that I have here can be summarized in that seabirds live longer, breed later, and have fewer young compared to other birds. And they are found in large colonies, anywhere from a few, tens to tens of hundreds to tens of thousands, and even some of the larger colonies in Alaska that actually have a few million birds. They are delayed in their breeding, so some birds require 3 to 5 to even 10 years before they'll actually breed their first time. So they have to survive even as a youngster in the wild until they can actually make breeding age. And so they're relatively long-lived. There's an example of albatross, a Laysan albatross in the Hawaiian archipelago, who I don't know if she's laid an egg yet this year, but she was about 61 or 62 last year, and she had laid another egg. So some of these birds can be very long-lived, but they only typically lay a single egg. And so that also is one of the reasons why they have fewer young. They only lay a single egg, and so they don't actually start breeding until they're 4 or 5. And then that egg is, once it hatches, the parents tend to that young generally, and most seabirds, and development can be very slow, up to 60 days in some cases for puffins. And then they can forage great distances. Again, those albatross that wander all the way from Laysan Island in the Hawaiian archipelago up into the Bering Sea. And that's just a foraging trip. They head back and feed their young what they found. And so overall low reproductive potential. And seabirds in general in Alaska, Alaska has over 75% of North American seabirds nesting in our state. We have a lot of coastline, and of course, we're the size of California, Texas, and Montana combined, so I'm told. So, and a lot of these birds actually come up from southern hemisphere, and they don't actually breed here. These are the shearwaters, short-tailed and sooty shearwaters, that because our waters are so productive, travel all the way up, and actually it's their winter essentially, and they come up. So we have a lot of seabirds that come up to our waters in Alaska. We actually have 38 species that nest here, and with a little over 1,300 colonies with over 1 million birds. So Alaska is quite a seabird haven, really. And so why do we monitor seabirds in Alaska? Well, a lot of it is to determine ocean change. They are a lot easier to study than the fish, and they're a lot easier to study than the marine mammals in many cases. And so we tout seabirds as indicators of marine ocean health. They rely on the ocean for their food, spend the majority of their time. They only come to land to breed. And so the other, 3/4 of the year, they're surviving in the ocean. And they're relatively easy to see and monitor at their breeding colonies. And so that's what really makes them a good indicator for ocean health. And along the lines of what they feed on, common prey, as I have listed here, Pacific sandlance and capelin are some of their favorites. And these are really, really rich in nutrients and protein. And there's good years and bad years for Pacific sandlance. And then capelin have been, they're cold water association. And so these last few years where we have a marine heat wave in the Gulf of Alaska, for example, a decline in those capelin. And in a bigger picture, there is a major regime shift in the ocean, going from a cold ocean to a warming ocean, and that's believed to have happened around 1976. And so when that regime shift, that change from a cold to a warmer water or a warmer ocean, we had a shift in the distribution of fish, but we also had different changes in the abundance. And so juvenile walleye pollock increased after that 1976 regime shift. But note that walleye pollock are not as high quality caloric value really compared to the sandlance and the capelin. And another thing is that a lot of seabirds are actually eating a lot of the euphausiids and copepods, the zooplankton and krill, and largely a lot of what we know about breeding seabirds is based on what we see them bring back to their young at the nests. And so based on things like stable isotopes and fatty acid analyses, we've learned that they're actually probably eating a lot more euphausiids, particularly during the winter, where they might be going out over the continental shelf or out into more exposed areas. And as an example of their metabolic rate, I've got common murre here. The bird weighs a little over 1,000 grams. And it's estimated that they need to consume every day between 10 and 30% of their body mass, which is the equivalent to 90 to 300 fish per day. So that's a lot of fishing, and successful fishing, not just fishing, that's actually catching, which I don't do a lot of when I go fishing. I usually just fish. Occasionally I get to catch. So, and a lot of this work in Alaska on seabirds, and then I'll get focused more on Prince William Sound, but this map here kind of demonstrates a lot of the longer term sites, and Prince William Sound is in there, but this is a good resource for those interested in kind of diving into more of the population trends and of our seabirds in Alaska. But breeding status and population trends of birds in Alaska. This is drafted by Don Dragoo at the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge. But that refuge and other partners have been collecting a lot of data since late 70s. Not every year, but a lot of years. And so that's looking at population trends, how the population is doing over time, overall productivity, the reproductive success, looking at diets, timing of breeding, and then overall adult survival. And so this figure on the far or lower right corner is kind of showing that long term. This is for pigeon guillemots in Prince William Sound, and it shows that decline. You see the first data points start about 1989 and then move over to 2018. And so the top figures there, it's a 5% decline. You see the -5 per annum. And so that's what's been seen in the last 10 years. And over the entire time, the span of that data set, it's been a 14.3% decline per year, essentially. And then this is just another example of some of the data that are in that status and trends of breeding birds in Alaska. I've highlighted the inner Prince William Sound. This is for black-legged kittiwake productivity, as well as the outer sound. And you see outer sound is doing a little bit worse, but really in the parentheses, it's showing kind of their long-term typical survival, typical productivity. That's the number of chicks that fledge per eggs laid. So, but anyways, I just wanted to point this out as a really good resource. And it is available online from Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge. But as you can see here, this is from 2019. Productivity was all right. It was actually above average at the outer. But you also see, if you look at the bars on the inner, you have to look closely, but you'll see a 0 there. And you also see in the outer, and that was unheard of. David Irons, this is actually David Irons's hard labor since 1984 and 85. But you see zeros, that was unheard of prior to that marine heat wave that started in 2014, but we really saw it spike in 2015-16. So again, this is just a great resource. And then another product that Alaska Maritime has been putting out, and this, if you look at this figure, see across the very top, we're looking at red-faced cormorants, and it moves all the way down as you move to the right to the least auklets. And if you look at the very bottom, you see this is trying to show that red-faced cormorants are primarily fish eaters, and as you move to the right, you kind of get into, they'll eat squid, and then it moves all the way to the auklets, which are primarily planktivores, eating zooplankton and phytoplankton. And so what I've summarized here, but the main point is this is kind of the follow-up to the ocean temperatures that have been warming. And sorry, I've got a bee in my basement, so if I scream and yell, it means I got stung. But anyways, so 2017, I'm just going to quickly show this. I've summarized at the very bottom, but this is in 2017, it was a very poor breeding year. If you look at all the cracked egg faces, and this is from longer term data sets that they've been monitoring, there was 15% complete failure, and that's pretty unheard of for seabirds. They generally get by pretty well. And so I'll forward to 2018 again. And what I should point out is on the left, you see from southeast, lower left, southeast, St. Lazaria, East Amatuli, and then it moves north up to Cape Lisburne. So this is Alaska wide, but generally trying to keep a finger on the pulse of how seabirds are doing. And what I want to point out is that, again, 19% complete failure. So this is really indicating that something is askew in the marine environment. And then I'll forward here to 2019. And essentially what I've done at the very bottom with the averaging, you see that it's gone from complete failures of 19+% to, in 2019, there was only 4%. So something seems to have kind of swung back. And then I've, not a great figure here, but I wanted to show that the great and the good, which are in the green and the light green, in 2017, you know, there was a lot of failure. There was the great wasn't so great, I should say. But by 2019, the good and the great got better, and the bad and the fail decreased. And so despite seeing a lot of seabird die-offs in 2018 and 19, as well as 2017, the birds actually did pretty well in 2019. So this is trying to be my more uplifting about how, something seems to have improved in 2019. So that was the good news. So, and then going to the Prince William Sound Marine Bird Survey. So in March 1989, the Exxon Valdez ran aground at Bly Reef. And so this figure actually shows that gray area is indicating areas impacted by that oil spill where it made landfall. And so at that time, David Irons had done 1984 and 1985. He navigated every inch of Prince William Sound and broke it into transects and counted every bird on the water, all the marine birds. And so when the oil spill happened in 1989, there was something that we had some pre-oil spill data, which is a very rare thing for, well, in this case, it was one of the few data sets. I believe killer whales had a data set prior to the oil spill, but other than that, there was very little data on the marine environment for Prince William Sound. So essentially they took David's coastline survey and then added a couple more strata to look at more offshore, because David hadn't focused at the offshore area. And so this is kind of this is showing our three different, we've got a shoreline transect indicated in red, coastal transects, and these are kind of north-south running transects that make landfall, and then pelagic transects. And so this was a way that we're trying to capture all the different birds and basically monitor recovery following that oil spill. So this is the long-term effort, and this is the work that I began in 2014, but initiated in 1989, but technically 1984 and 85 with David's surveys. And these are done by three 25-foot Boston whalers, counting essentially along these transect lines. And so in 2012, Dan Cushing finished his thesis. And so I got to give a large shout out to Dan. Dan did a terrific job. But Dan was looking more at the community dynamics of Prince William Sound. And there are a lot of identification issues with some of the birds. For example, kittlets and marbled murrelets, some of the terns, Aleutian and Arctic terns. And so what Dan did is just looked at the genus, or genera, the plural of genus. And so he basically looked at 18 different genera, and he analyzed those looking at a community-based approach, which I'll get into here. And this is kind of the spoiler alert, essentially from Dan's work, 1989 to 2012, three species, or sorry, I should say 3 genera had increased, whereas 8 had declined. And so a quick look, so this is kind of an ordinal charting, but essentially you see we're looking at a gradient here. And so genera are listed along the right, going Ardea, that's the great blue herons, Brachyramphus, that's the marbled and kittlets. And basically he's got the numbers and he's plotted them here, and he's showing a gradient from estuaries to marine on the left side and onshore to offshore on the bottom. And basically showing like marine is where you have sea cliffs, but estuarine is where fresh water is flowing into the ocean. And then onshore, offshore, of course, onshore is shallow and offshore gets deep. And so that's also based on distance from shore. So that's kind of a simple, that's a generalization of what Dan did. Of course, he ran the black box and I'm just here using his slide. But this is a slide that Dan used to kind of say, well, essentially, instead of those dots, look at it this way. So again, marine and estuarine, onshore and offshore as these gradients. He's put images of the bird instead of those red dots with a number next to them. And so you see on the left side, you've got golden eyes, blue crown night heron, great blue heron, oyster catchers. And so going back to that spoiler alert, this is ultimately what Dan found. And I won't go into the weighted multiple regression because I'd have to have him explain it to me again. But here basically you see that the lines, the arrows, the thicker the arrow, the more confident the measure was. And then I guess the basic thing to look here is that the onshore birds, the heron, harlequin ducks, and then cormorants increased, whereas these other birds decreased. And so the onshore or nearshore birds actually were doing better population-wise compared to those birds offshore. And so then now I inherited, Dan did a great job with that data set. And so in 2014, I took over the project. And so this is what I found. And so one of the things that happened after I took it over in 2014, that was the buildup of the marine heat wave in Alaska, and particularly in the Gulf of Alaska. And so what we see here, and I'll focus a little bit more on the Brachyrampus merlets, the Kittiwakes and marbleds, but here you see them lumped, and those p-values are showing how confident we are when we say that there's a decline or not a decline, or an increase or not a decrease. But one thing you'll see here is in the upper left, the harlequin ducks, which Dan had seen increase. What I've seen since I took over the survey is a decrease in harlequin ducks. Similar for scoters. Aleutian terns are kind of stable, but they've decreased over the time of the survey since 1989. Fork-tailed storm petrels, which Dan had as decreasing, actually have increased since the marine heat wave. And I've got some ideas why that might be, but same thing with the parasitic Jaegers. They also increased since 2014. And those are again, if you look at the bottom, I've listed them by near shore to offshore, from left being near shore and to the right being offshore. And so MERS dipped down, but also came back and increased. Tufted puffins have been decreasing. But so I'm wondering if these observations of fork-tailed and parasitic Jaegers have actually increased because they're coming into Prince William Sound looking for food over the past few years. And the other thing, and I'll focus on the merlets in the center there, there's also sometimes a time lag between that marine heat wave, that increase in ocean temperatures, and of course the effects on the fish, because fish are so temperature sensitive. And then I'll also point out pigeon guillemot here, just to the lower left. That species also been decreasing. And I'll talk a little bit about restoration work at the Naked Island group in Prince William Sound, but in general, sound-wide, we've seen a decrease in guillemots and merlets.
Robb, I just wanted to give you a 5 minutes, and we do have a couple of questions. So
okay, yeah, I'll keep zipping then. And these are the Brachyrampus merlets, and I just show these because in the last, I was really, the survey this summer is actually canceled, so I won't be able to confirm this, but numbers in 2018 of Kittiwakes and marbled merlets were really down compared to long-term numbers. So something that we hope to look into. And then the pigeon guillemot restoration at Naked Island. Mink had been introduced at Naked Island. And then this was a project funded by the EVOS Trustees Council. And as you see here in the blue, that's the estimated mink abundance. So those were counts, and that was based on trapping. And as you see, by 2017 to 2019, we haven't detected any mink. And with those mink removal, you see in the red an increase in adult guillemots. These are counts that we do on the water in late May, early June population census. And you see that number. So remove mink, increase your guillemots. And then we're no longer doing the guillemot nest study, but you also saw we had a graduate student out there from 2014 to 18, and we saw an increase in nests as well. And then this is an image from January 1st, 2016. Essentially, David Irons went down to check on a friend's boat in Whittier and looked over and saw what he couldn't possibly have imagined to be snow, and so ended up going out and counting about 78,000 dead birds, dead murres on the beach. So that, of course, launched a media extravaganza. And I basically stepped into my role as coordinating seabird die-offs, which we haven't had major die-offs in the Gulf of Alaska since 2016, but I thought this might be an opportunity to, for folks that are out there plying the waters, whatever time of year, if you do happen to see odd behavior, large flocks of common murres, for example, that seem like they shouldn't be there, or short-tailed shearwaters, or sooty shearwaters. But essentially, we think that there's warm water effects affecting the predator and the prey. But there might also be other effects of that of warm water, including more frequent harmful algal bloom effects. So this is a phone number and an email address that you can send any reports to if you do have observations while you're out there of dead or dying birds. We're really interested in that. And then we've got during these die-offs, we've been trying to create a fact sheet that lets community members know what we're doing and what type of reports we are receiving from folks out on the coastal communities. And with that, I thank you for your time. Please jot down my email if you've got questions that we don't get to during this. I'm happy to email or send you any of the documents that I've referenced here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Rob. So this video, of course, will be on the website, but we wondered if we could also take your slides and post those individually, because they're so interesting, and I think a lot of people will be able to really take advantage of those. Do you mind if we post those separately?
No, yeah, I think hopefully I gave everybody photo credit, and Dan Cushing got credit too. So no, I think that would be great.
We do have just a couple minutes, and I have two questions. It said, we have noticed that there seem to be fewer mew gulls the south end of Kenai Lake and heading on into Anchorage, especially along Turnagain Arm and Potter's Marsh. Is this a trend researchers are seeing? Could you comment on this?
That is a good question. We have seen, I can refer to, as far as the mew gulls, I can't actually give a very good answer to that. That is information that it's reports that we've had. They don't seem to have been declining, at least in Prince William Sound, based on at-sea surveys or the shoreline surveys. But that's something to think about. I can't say that, at least in the Prince William Sound marine bird data, that we've seen that trend, but I could ask for at-sea folks in my office whether they're seeing any kind of trends, as well as the folks at USGS Alaska Science Center. Sorry, that's not a good answer, but it's something for me to think about.
A couple other folks wanted to know if there were any myths that you'd like to debunk about Prince William Sound seabirds.
Well, I don't know. I guess I haven't heard all the myths. I guess shoot me some questions about, shoot me some myths and I'll see if I can debunk them. I guess I don't have any myths that I'm aware of. Maybe
and we just put Rob's email there, of course, in the chat. So thank you so much for your time and terrific information, super valuable. And we're going to move on to the next speaker. So again, thanks so much, Rob.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. We're moving on with Shad O'Neill, research geophysicist with USGS Alaska Science Center. And he's going to be talking about connecting glaciers to South Central Alaska ecosystem. As a federal research scientist at the U.S. Geological Survey, Shad's primary role is overseeing the USGS Benchmark Glacier Project, making sense of mass balance measurements from 5 North American glaciers. He has studied a diverse array of mountain glaciers issues, including iceberg calving, tidewater glacier instability, flow mechanics and dynamics, and regional glacier change in Alaska. So big stuff. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to get out of here so that you can take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. This one. Okay, are the slides visible? Okay, no one can talk. So
Yep,
okay,
it looks good.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how glaciers are connected to the ecosystem, in particular in South Central Alaska, since this is a symposium on Prince William Sound. I've been working with quite a few people on this project. Their names are listed here. Most of them are from USGS, but we've got one academic collaborator as well. So this is a GIF. Oops. Let's see. Okay, there it goes. That shows Wolverine Glacier on the Kenai Peninsula, one picture a year in September from 2012 to 2019. Just showing you the loss of glacier ice over those few years. The glacier's thinned by about 200 feet and retreated, I don't know, a quarter to half a mile in that time frame. So what? Who cares? Why should people care if glaciers are disappearing from Alaska? I'd like to convince you that there are global to local scale motivators to understand glaciers a little bit better than we do. At the global scale, we're mostly concerned with sea level rise. And then as we zoom back into the more local scales, I think fisheries are one of the things that we're most concerned with. And so I've got two graphs here that you can look at. One shows you the volume, the area, and the fraction of sea level rise. This is an older slide, but the numbers are still roughly right. So here's the glaciers and ice caps on the left. That's everything but the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. And you can see that the volume isn't really visible, but we've got the largest bar for percentage of sea level rise. So the small glaciers do actually make a difference for sea level rise. On the right is a brand new paper that shows the amount of mass loss for all the mountain glacier regions around planet Earth. And what you can notice is that the Alaska region on the left has the biggest red bullseye, meaning it's losing mass faster than any other mountain glacier region on the planet. So the glaciers are changing, and they have impacts that go from sea level rise down to ecosystem function and tourism. We're starting to see in the literature more and more papers focused on how glaciers are coupled to the ecosystem. It's an emerging science topic. I'm just showing cartoons from 3 recent papers that indicate that these that glaciers are connected to their ecosystems, which is a fairly new idea. But the observations to help us constrain conceptual or even numerical models are really scarce. And so my group has been focused on building an observational platform that helps us to understand these connections. And that's mostly what I'll be sharing with you today. But before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of background on how we go about measuring glacier change, just because it's potentially not totally obvious. We can't pick the glaciers up and put them on a scale. So what we do is we measure what we call a mass balance, and we're looking for the change rather than the total mass of the glacier. So the mass balance is defined as the change in the mass of a glacier over some stated span of time, which we usually take to be a year. And traditionally, historically, in any sort of long evolutionary view, or a view of how these things are changing in time, we use point measurements made in the field to estimate the mass change. So I've got some photos here from Wolverine Glacier that show you how we're making these measurements. We put stakes in the snow and ice in the fall. You can see this guy standing here. That stake will get buried in the winter with snow. We dig snow pits and we drill snow and fern cores to better understand how much snow accumulates in the winter as opposed to how much melt happens in the summer. We also maintain weather stations on the side of the glaciers, and that helps us to model over short time periods the change and understand the forcing for subseasonal glacier change. So we make these point measurements. Again, this is Wolverine Glacier, and just some of the points where we measure are shown here. There's a scale bar. You can imagine that this takes a couple days to get around to all these places by foot. And then we parameterize that as with elevation, which is shown here, where we make these point measurements, we fit a line to them, and we integrate them over the glacier area, which is shown here in bars. And what we get from that is the mass balance. I'll go through this in reverse order. These plots here show you how much mass the glaciers lost in a conceptual way, where the y-axis is in units of meters of water equivalent averaged over the entire surface. Wolverine Glacier is the second one down here in blue. So you can see it's lost about 20 meters of water averaged over its surface since the mid-1960s. The average rates of change pre-1990 and post-1990 are shown in the gray bars. You can see that in all cases, the glaciers that we're working on at USGS, the rates have accelerated. So these are the glaciers that we're working on, from Alaska down to Washington and Montana. You can see we've got kind of formed a continental scale view of how the glaciers are changing from these very specific glaciers. Most of the records are started in the 50s and 60s and continue today. We just published a paper on this, two papers actually, one in 19 and one in 2020. And what we found from this comprehensive reanalysis of all the data collected is that all the glaciers are losing mass since since measurements started, and that the mass loss is faster since 1990, which is just roughly the midpoint of the record. We used to see that maritime glaciers were buffered by heavy winter precipitation, but that is less important today than it was decades ago. And warmer summers really are what's driving the mass loss of these glaciers. Of all of the 5 glaciers that USGS measures, the highest interannual variability is seen at Wolverine Glacier and the lowest at Lemon Creek Glacier outside of Juneau. Both of these are maritime glaciers. They're really near to the coast. So that kind of calls into question what we were talking about before, that the winter snow and the highly variable winters that we have can help to buffer mass loss at these glaciers. We've also been finding that our putting everything in a reference frame of elevational control is not the best idea, that you can't really get the right answer if you don't consider elevation independent processes in regulating the mass change of these glaciers. So here's an example from South Cascade Glacier in Washington, where you can see, hopefully you can see my mouse, where we've got this fern margin that does not go as a function of elevation. Rather, it's following this shadow where the mountain on the side of the glacier casts a shadow onto the ice. And the fern is just the leftover snow, basically. And here's an example from Wolverine Glacier. We're looking in this red box here in the picture, and you can see that there's tons of snow in these big drifts, and then there's exposed ice at the exact same elevation. And we're finding that if we don't pay attention to those details, we get the wrong answer. As we've begun to incorporate newer technology into understanding how Alaska's glaciers in particular are changing, we're using aircraft and space satellites and to measure mass change. This is a slide showing how we use airborne LiDAR, where we're shooting a laser beam from an airplane down to the glacier and catching it. All of these little black squiggles around the state are where the measurements exist. This is all published in a paper by Chris Larson from Fairbanks in 2015. And what here is the answer for all of Alaska. You can see that the land terminating glaciers are dominating the mass loss from the region, followed by the lake ending glaciers, and third by the Tidewater glaciers. And the reason that the Tidewater glaciers are not as large as perhaps we expected is because a few of them, of Alaska's largest glaciers, are continuing to advance even in a warming climate. And so the advances cancel out some of the dramatic retreats. I'll show you a slide from Columbia Glacier near the end of the talk. Okay, so how do we connect the mass loss to the ecosystem, and what are we trying to think about? We'd like to know what the role of land ice in water and nutrient budgets as exported to the nearshore ocean are. So how much water are we losing, and what kind of nutrients are going with that water? And how does that evolve both interannually and on seasonal timescales? And how do we expect that these budgets are going to change as the ice cover over South Central Alaska decreases? Will those changes be focused in magnitude or primarily in timing, or will we see a bit of both? So this is a model that was published a couple years ago for the Nellie, well, it's published for the whole Alaska region. I'm zooming into the Nellie Juan river basin where Wolverine Glacier is located. And in this view, we're looking at area loss by 2100, where the dark reds are indicating almost or complete loss of the glacier. Even the yellows are suggestive of 30 to 40% of glacier loss. And what this model suggests is that most, if not all, of the glaciers will undergo significant mass or area loss by the end of the century. And that loss can be both in area and thickness. So even though some of these glaciers, like on the Sargent Icefield, don't have high area loss, they may lose more in thickness, which to account for a greater volume change. And the smallest glaciers that are on the periphery of the large ice masses are the ones that are changing the fastest. And because of that, those are the ecosystems that will be impacted the most strongly. So understanding the connection between the ice and the ecology is really all about the water. So we have to get more familiar with glacier hydrology. And so we'll start with this cartoony picture on the right, where we've got a warming climate, the mass balance of the glacier, if we hit it with a step change, an instant change in the climate, in this case a warming, we get an instant change in the mass balance, a delayed response in the glacier volume, and a further delayed and a shape change in the runoff, where we get a peak in runoff, and then at some point the ice has reduced its volume and we return to lower levels. And importantly, they're lower than they started before the climate forcing happened. So this is the way we conceptualize what will happen to stream flow as glaciers change. This picture here just shows an annual hydrograph for glaciers coming from the Juneau area. And it really emphasizes the difference between forested and glaciarized watersheds. These have been normalized by basin area, so you're not looking at small versus large basins. You're looking at how the land cover impacts the stream flow and ultimately delivery of water and nutrients to the ocean. So there's several different viewpoints of how to include glaciers in the water cycle. Depends what your background is. People that study hydrology have typically left ice up here in the mountains unconnected to the ecosystem because including it in their models is hard. Glaciologists, on the other hand, tend to worry about how the water is getting from the glacier from the glacier surface through the middle to the bed and out from the terminus. Once it leaves the glacier, it tends to be forgotten. But if I was a water manager or an ecologist, really what I'd want to know is if I'm at a fixed space like this stream gauge here below Wolverine Glacier, how is the water from this basin, which has partial ice cover, going to change as the ice disappears? That's a harder question to answer than the two cartoons on the right. And we can add to it and say, how would the nutrient fluxes change? So to do that, we have to solve this nasty equation, the water balance equation, where we're basically just looking at the changes in the glacier, we're looking at precipitation, and we're balancing those with discharge or runoff from the basin and evapotranspiration. I'm not going to get into it, but I'll just share with you some lessons that we've learned from the water budget. This is a picture of the old precipitation gauge at Wolverine Glacier at mass maximum. So when we would expect the most snow on the landscape. And you can see that it's barren ground there. Precipitation's tough. Instruments don't work very well. How do you go from a point to a distributed precipitation rate? We don't have long records of precipitation. And the wind, as we all know, is blowing the snow all over the landscape. So how much did it really snow here? It's very challenging to say. We make some assumptions about precipitation and we can come up with some conclusions. We know that snow still dominates over rain in the mountains of Prince William Sound, but less than it used to because we're getting more rain in the winter. Snow sticks to the glaciers better than to the solid earth. And we really don't understand that all the way yet, but we see much, much more snow accumulating on glaciers than around the sides of the glaciers, even at the same elevation. Mass turnover, so the conveyor belt of glaciers pushing water downstream, but the glacier staying in the same geometry, exceeds volume change by a factor of 8 or 9. And that's shown here in this graph for Alaska, in a paper that Andy Bliss wrote. And then evapotranspiration, that is the uptake of water by plants, and then evaporation from barren ground straight up to the atmosphere is non-negligible increasing. And I just show a picture here of the stream gauge at Wolverine Glacier comparing the 70s to 2016, and you can see the really the rapid colonization of alders across the landscape as ice is removed from South Central Alaska. So I'm just going to go a little bit. I'm not going to get too much into the chemistry because we don't have time. But I want to show you a little bit about how interesting the spectrum of source waters from these basins is. Again, we're still at Wolverine Glacier, and this is a really unique opportunity. This is a satellite image, and you can see that there's forest and the lower elevations. There's alpine tundra in the middle, and then there's all this glacier ice within this basin. And so we can go to this end member ecosystems for South Central Alaska in the same basin that's gauged by the USGS. And so these ecosystems are in close proximity, but they're pretty much isolated from each other. And so here are some photos of the different kinds of water sources that we're finding in the basin. We've got the glacier, we've got the clear blue water on the surface and the muddy brown water coming out of the bottom of the glacier. Got these idyllic tundra streams within the basin. Got groundwater seeping out of the rocks in the lower basin. And then we've got the shrub forest and the hemlock forest ecosystems. And then we can go all the way down to near Tidewater to capture where those waters are all mixed together. And here I'm just showing you water temperature for simplicity, where I've got a time series of data from last summer for those different source water ecosystems. Red is a tundra stream, blue is a shrub forest, orange is the mixed waters, and then right down in the bottom you see the glacier where it's just discharging basically 1 degree water through the whole summer. Those are shown in box plots to show you how different they are on average, right below with the same labels, the same colors. And we're doing this with several different physical and chemical variables throughout the summer. And what we're seeing is that for not only for temperature, but for the chemical signatures too, that there's a strong source dependence of these different nutrients and physical properties. And a lot of the chemistry, especially carbon, has a very strong microbial signature from the glacier. There's a whole microbial ecosystem that lives on and under the glaciers that's being discharged into the nearshore ocean. And these measurements are allowing us to develop a mixing model. So I've got a cartoon here of what a mixing model is. Take yellow and blue paint, you pour it in, and out comes green. So the green is the mixed model going in, or the mixed water going into the ocean. This might be the tundra, and this might be the glacier. But we can do this for more colors of paint, and maybe that's why the glacier rivers are always brown. Just because it's in Prince William Sound, it's close to my heart, and I think I've got a couple minutes left here. I wanted to give you, those who are interested, a little bit of an update at Columbia Glacier. This is an image from 2004 when I did my PhD at Columbia Glacier. You can see the calving front here is right against this mountain called Caden. This was the west branch in the middle and the main branch going off to the right side of the photo. I managed to get a repeat photo in 2017, and it's lined up pretty well, although it may be hard for you to figure out what's going on. Caden is here. You can see the west branch has been completely removed, and the main branch has not only retreated another 5 or 10 kilometers, but it has thinned dramatically as well. And this is the view from last year. You can see that the retreat and the thinning continue. The west branch in particular has completely retreated out of Tidewater. And there's a really interesting ecosystem connection that's happening at these Tidewater glaciers. And I just got a cartoon of it here. But the important thing about Tidewater glaciers is that there is a river, just like a land terminating glacier, that's coming out of the glacier, but it comes out at the bottom of the ocean. And in the case of Columbia during the middle of its retreat, that was in 500 meters of ocean water. And this fresh water is highly buoyant, and it upwells along the calving face, melting the glacier and forming an even fresher water plume that flows out the fjord. So we've got this fresh lid on the fjord and this warm water that's being advected along the bottom of the ocean. And this upwelling is transporting lots of biota up along the calving face. And that's why you tend to see lots of seabirds plunge feeding the little krill and other things that have gone through osmotic shock. They're easy to prey on. So there's a feast waiting for the birds. And then the seals are also pretty happy out here. There's an abundant food source, and there's some refuge from the icebergs. That might be a physical refuge, and it might be an acoustic refuge too. The whales have a hard time hunting because the water's turbid and it's a very noisy acoustic environment. And I don't have another cartoon of what it looks like if the glacier retreats out of the water, but this freshwater discharge at the bottom of the glacier is now coming out at the top, and you lose this upwelling as a result of that. And so you don't have as easy of a food source. And it's hypothesized that we'll really see a loss of these ecological hotspots as we lose our Tidewater glaciers in Alaska. So we're just now starting to be able to pull a lot of these different ideas together into computer models where we're looking at different kinds of climate forcing and partitioning ice and snow and rain on snow and rain through the year as we go towards 2100. And you can see that the colors are different in all of these plots for today and moderate and aggressive climate forcing, suggesting that there will be strong changes in the way water is delivered to the landscape and then eventually to the ocean as the climate continues to warm. These models, though, are really lacking a lot of observational constraints, which is why our group has really been focused on providing the observations to support these models. A lot of what the models suggest, though, is ringing true. Most notably, I think that the water flow is changing the most in the fall and the early winter. This is just a list of ecological implications that you can scan through really quickly. They span the freshwater and riverine systems, the terrestrial systems, and the ocean ecosystems. And I posted a plot here from a paper out of a fisheries journal. And I just find it interesting that we're seeing in what's happening to Alaska salmon that a glacier mass balance plot is showing up in these new papers. And I think that really speaks to, this is not just a biased glaciologist talking to you about the loss of ice, that both sides of the equation are interested in what's happening to the ice and how it's influencing the ecosystems, and in particular, the fisheries. So to summarize, we've got 5 USGS benchmark glaciers that have undergone this really consistent analysis, reanalysis lately, and they show a ubiquitous mass loss signal. We've instrumented Wolverine Glacier to capture the physical and biological processes extensively and simultaneously, And we're seeing how the changes in snow and ice are significantly impacting the hydrograph, the runoff from the basin, the water quality, and ecosystem processes. Our model capacity is only just emerging, but lots of open questions remain. And that's what I brought for you today. Thanks.
Shad, thank you so much. Those pictures are very telling. We do have a couple of questions I'd like to put out there for you.
Sure.
Aaron Walker asked, is there a document or a website that shows which glaciers in Prince William Sound and Alaska are receding or increasing, and how many feet are they growing, shrinking? Also, how tall they are at their face and length. Is there a resource with that information?
I don't know of anything new that goes Prince William Sound detail like that. There's really just a handful of Tidewater glaciers in Alaska that are advancing or gaining mass. Taku Glacier outside of Juneau is moving into retreat. That's maybe the most famous advancing glacier in Alaska. We're not seeing Hubbard advance as much anymore. Yahtzee Glacier is advancing and losing mass. So we're not really seeing much for mass gain anymore.
All right, and one more. Can cryocism help scientists do better understand climate change? If so, how does it help and what does it tell us about it? It's from Darius.
Maybe, can I see that? Okay, I think he's maybe asking about cryoseismology, which we use earthquake sensors to understand iceberg calving and these like landslide, or we're seeing glacier detachments now that are being recorded around the planet. So there's a brand new paper out in Geology last week, 2 weeks ago maybe, about the glaciers in the Wrangles, where they just the lower half completely detached and slid down the valley. We are seeing weird things, and seismology does offer us a mechanism to study those by, so it is quite useful.
And we had one more question. I've heard 70% of glaciers in Alaska may be gone by the end of this century. True? Question mark?
Yeah, the models are just emerging that help us to understand that. 70 is maybe a little bit high. I think we're probably looking more in the 30 to 60% range, but nevertheless, it's a staggering number, even to glaciologists, one that's really hard to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, for sure. Shad, thank you so much for your time and expertise and those terrific graphs. And we're going to move on to the next speaker now, but we really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, Shad. All right, folks. Our last presentation is Dan Olsen, Research Director at North Gulf Oceanic Society, and perfectly titled Mother Knows Best, Killer Whale Culture and Generational Learning. So Dan was hooked on killer whale culture when he started learning acoustic dialects with his hydrophone as a tour boat captain in Seward. Then took a pay cut and a passion upgrade as he completed a master's at UA Fairbanks and took on the role of research director at North Gulf Oceanic Society, which is dedicated to monitoring health of killer whale populations in Alaska. Dan spends a disproportionate amount of time looking for whale poop and listening to last winter's remote recording. So, hi, Dan. Terrific to see you here. All right, inquiring minds want to know, whale poop? All right, it's all yours, Dan.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dan Olsen with the North Gulf Oceanic Society, and I did attend UA Fairbanks and did a master's there. I want to start out just by thanking everybody for hanging in there till the end of the day, and you all need your stretches. So be a male killer whale dorsal fin for a second, swim through the water, be a female dorsal fin, swim through the water for a second. And I have some questions to start off for you all, just to make sure you're awake and out there and know the chat button. What locations in Prince William Sound have you seen killer whales or orca so far this year? Just type in what locations you have seen so far this year, and we will hopefully see some chats come through there. I would like to start by just acknowledging my title, Mother Knows Best, Killer Whale Culture and Generational Learning. The most fascinating bit for me has been this cultural aspect, how every single killer whale out there swims with its mother its whole life. Very true for residents, likely true for offshores, somewhat true for transients. We'll talk about those types in a minute. But the motherhood factor, the matriarchal society here, we see cultural learning through generations, and that's not only humans and killer whales that do that. We see that in chimpanzees, we see that in bonobos and elephants, and has been a fascinating topic of study lately. I see on my screen you've seen them at Main Bay, Culross, Esther, Unakwick, Porcupine Cove. Awesome, Jim. I haven't seen them out there this year. I did get a chance to see some offshore killer whales this year come into Resurrection Bay. About 80 to 100 came in at the same time, which was absolutely fascinating. I am part of the North Gulf Oceanic Society. Many of you may have met Craig Mackin, who started the program back in 1984. And as Robb Kaler mentioned in his talk, one of the few studies to start before the oil spill happened in 1989. We're often found on the research vessel RV Natoa. Either Craig will be on board or I will be on board as we share the nonprofit and share the season. And here is a few of our hot spots where we like to work: in Kenai Fjords in May and June, in Hinchinbrook Entrance in June and July, and in Montague Strait in August and September. You'll notice that we don't have track lines in some of the places you mentioned, like Unakwick and Esther. That's not because there's not killer whales there. Obviously, you have seen them there. That is because if we're spending our research money, we want bang for the buck, and we want to go to the places where we have a higher percentage of whales coming and going. But we certainly have benefited from contributed photos from many of you in the sound.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're not seeing your slides.
Okay, well, there we go. That's very good to know. How about that?
Great. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
All right. So there's a map of where a lot of our encounters have been over the last 10 years, and we tend to go to the hotspots to maximize what we are doing there. And before we get any further in this presentation, I just want one more chance to exercise that chat box. You're going to hear me say orca, and you're going to hear me say killer whale. If you think orca is the proper term, type orca. If you think killer whale is the proper term, write KW. And when I say proper, the scientific term, which is the scientific term for this animal? One person says KW. KW, another one, which is not fair. You work on the boat with me. Hi, Tony. Another KW. These are all people I've talked to about this exact conversation, and there we come some orca as well. Well, many people are surprised to find out that the scientific common name is killer whale, and orca is more recent slang based on the Latin name, which is Orcinus orca. More recent slang because it's just an abbreviation of that Latin name. If you were to write a science paper, every time you'd write it, you would say Orcinus orca once, and then every other time you mention them would be killer whale, killer whale, killer whale. Just like tufted puffin is the common scientific name in English for the tufted puffin, killer whale is actually the common scientific name for killer whale or orca. However, the media and those whale huggers who don't want to call them killers do like the term orca. I'd like to introduce you to this particular orca or killer whale, as you'll hear me say a lot, AT9 Chiniga. I want to introduce you to her because she's a mother. She is an animal that has been living for a long time. We don't know how old she actually is. She's probably 40 to 50 years old. She swam right through the oil spill with her family. She is, and she is the reason that I myself got into killer whale work. I was running a tour boat in Prince William Sound and had bought a hydrophone and a recording device so that I could listen to what I thought would be humpbacks most of the time. One day there was this one lone animal tail slapping, breaching all alone, and I made this recording. And of course, many people feel that that sounds like a long, lonely wailing call. Interestingly enough, that is a call that only members of the AT1s or Chugach transients make. And they, being transients, they're quite local actually, but transient means they're a genetically distinct population that eats mammals only. And when they get separated and they're hunting, they'll make this call to find each other and regroup. And we've seen that multiple times. If any of you ever got to meet or work with Eva Salidas, who we lost to cancer recently, she wrote a whole book about her experience doing her master's degree on this population, recording their calls and watching them slowly dwindle down from 22 animals before the oil spill to just 7 afterwards. Here's the 7 that remain, and 89 Shaniga, the one that started this off for me. I heard that call and I made a recording. I sent it over to the research boat. Craig and Eva were coming in from the Sound at the time. This is back in 2004. They said, oh, that's one of the AT1s trying to get in touch with the rest of the group. And I said, no way, impossible. And so later I left, ran into 2 more killer whales. They got together with AT9. It was AT9, 10, and 18. They all got together. Sure enough, Craig and Eva came in, photographed all of them. It was who they thought it was, doing what they thought they were doing. And I was hooked. I couldn't go back then. The acoustics, the calls, knowing these families by the way they call, the calls they make, completely hooked me in and sunk me into this life that I'm in now, happily so. This pod, as well as the AB pod of fish-eating killer whales, our residents, did actually swim through the oil spill directly, and of course lost quite a few members and have not recovered. They have not, the AT1 group or Chugach transients have not had a calf since the year before the oil spill. And here are some members swimming right through the spill itself. And I wanted to introduce you to this mother just because not only she's the one that started it all for me, but she is a mother. This is a matrilineal society. The offspring swim with the mother and they end up having the same diet as the mother. They end up visiting the same regions as the mother. And there's a lot of habits that we tend to end up seeing that were taught through these matriarchal lineages. Even the males, when you see a big, tall male dorsal fin, it's easy to assume he's the leader of the pack. He is not. He is a giant mama's boy, and he will swim with his mother his entire life. Well, some of these things that we know now about killer whales, about orca, are from long-term photographic studies. Back in the 80s, Michael Biggs noticed through repeat photography that he could identify actual individuals. And here's some of the easy ones in the AB pod, which are often seen in Prince William Sound. Sometimes notches in the dorsal fin, that's the easiest for us, but huge swaths of pigmentation changes, like an open saddle that you see there, or some people call that a hook, can give away an individual. Now, you will have similar individuals with similar saddle patches or similar notches, but eventually you can put it all together. And you notice even on the lower left there, AB24 has plenty of scratches in his saddle and that's from teeth marks from other killer whales, which we presume is from play fighting. Over time, if we see the same individuals over and over again, then we call that group a pod if they are together more than 50% of their encounters, and we call them a matriline if they are together all the time and direct descendants of a mother or grandmother. So here are some examples of matrilines that we find in different pods, some of the regular suspects to Prince William Sound and the Kenai Fjords both. Through these lineages, when we photograph a mother and a calf, then we suspect that belongs to her. If we see them together again in subsequent encounters, we start to build on our confidence of who is related to who and who's been swimming with who their entire lives. And we see a tremendous amount of consistency with that. Of course, the females will live about 60 to 80 years. Males live about 40, 45 years. And we're often asked why that is. And it's probably because males of many females have to take care of their young through a long life. And males of many species tend to do stupid and reckless things. Another really cool thing that we've been able to determine over time through this repeat photography was we noticed that the same animals, the same families of animals have the same diets. So the AK pod or the AJ pod, ABs, AIs that you see in the Sound up near Whittier, you often see the AD16s or the AE pod, and we always see them feeding on fish, on salmon in particular. Other pods, like the Chugach transients or AT1s, or an animal we call Matushka that focuses on sea lions, AT109, and other groups, we call them transients because they have a larger range, but really the main distinction is that they feed on mammals and they are genetically very, very distinct. And of course, we have a group called offshores. It's a genetically distinct population. Some swam into Resurrection Bay on April 17th of this year. And this photo is from 2012, just outside the Seward shiplift, of a 4.5-foot long shark liver from a Pacific sleeper shark. And offshore killer whales eat only fish, but they appear to specialize in shark. About 95% of our observations on the water are shark predation. They will eat a little bit of Chinook and halibut, but pretty much mostly just shark for them. Their teeth are actually worn down as a result. So the photography and the long-term follows help us determine this, but sometimes we need a little better resolution or proof in a different way. We don't always get the chance to see a porpoise in the mouth of a killer whale. So we collect prey samples. And here's Tony leaning off the bow trying to get either some scat or salmon scales. We try and look for scat. We try and look for prey samples. There have been times where we've picked up a spleen or a lung of a porpoise. There's other times where we pick up scales from salmon. And of course, when we do that, we are confirming what's been known for a long time, that the transients are eating mammals, the residents are eating fish, the offshores are eating shark. When we look for salmon scales, we can find that not only the species of salmon, we can find out the sex of the salmon, the age of the salmon, and from the DNA on the scale, we can tell even what river those salmon are coming from. In Kenai Fjords, we have a hot zone near Agnes Cove and Cheval Narrows, Pony Cove, and during that time, we pick up primarily Chinook scales, and during that time, a large percentage of those scales are coming from fish whose DNA suggests they are coming from the Situk and the Stikine rivers in southeast Alaska. The interesting thing about this is the Situk weir shows its peak every year at about July 1st with the returning Chinook salmon. And our peak time in Kenai Fjords for collecting these scales from that river is about 3 to 4 weeks before that. And given the distance, that's quite a likely run for those salmon to do on their way to return. The scales we collect often are age 4, 5, and 6-year-old fish that are likely going back, returning to spawn. Just from the salmon scales when we collect, we show that Chinook, coho, and chum are predominant in the diet, but it does vary on location. In Agnes Cove and Resurrection Bay, Chinook is predominant, but offshore of Cape Iolek and Cape Resurrection, chum is predominant. In Hinchinbrook Entrance in June and July, chum is predominant, but in all of the Sound in July and August, coho is predominant. So the season and the location are very important for what results we get back from collecting salmon scales. And the moment you've all been waiting for, whale poop. I didn't ever dream that I would go back to get a master's degree to become a professional pooper scooper, nor did Tony probably think that he'd spend part of his time doing pottery and part of his time scooping poo. But we get a tremendous amount of good information. We get the DNA of all the prey species, but potentially contaminants. We're looking for microplastics. We're looking for, so you can look for stress hormones and other things in the scat. And the diet studies we do when we collect a scat, put it in a jar, label it nicely, record as much data as possible, send it to the lab, the NOAA lab in Seattle, Northwest Fisheries Science Center, and they will analyze it, amplify the DNA, sequence it, and we are finding that Chinook, chum are vastly dominating the scat samples, but halibut and arrowtooth flounder are also present. You'll notice I don't have coho listed. That's because we have not yet picked up any scat in July or August, and we suspect that if we did, it would be heavily dominated by coho at that time. A lot of interesting things are coming out of the combination of scales and scat, and we'll be hoping to publish a paper on that here shortly in the next couple of years. Now, you can also write into your chat button if you think there's more than one species. We actually currently are only considering killer whales as one species, but it's very likely in our lifetimes that we'll see them labeled into more than one. And if you have seen or read about this, the Biggs killer whale, or the transient, is the likeliest candidate to be called a separate species. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see resident killer whales. Those are the fish eaters, transients, offshores, and then in the eastern North Atlantic, a smaller type 1 and larger type 2, which mostly but not exclusively eat fish for the smaller type and mammals for the larger type. On the right side, you have all the southern hemisphere, males and females side by side there. And we see a high distinction in their diet as well. Type A is eating large seals, whales. Large type B is eating washing leopard seals and crab-eater seals and Weddell seals off the ice together, making a huge wave. You have the small type B's eating penguins and possibly fish. The Ross Sea killer whale type C's eating fish. So far, that's all they've been observed eating. And type D's, which we don't know much about. Incredible dietary specialization from all these types. And these are types living in the temperate regions. And a lot of questions that we get are, why don't they eat a little bit of this, eat a little bit of that, and be more opportunistic? Particularly in the case in the San Juan Islands, the southern residents that aren't doing so well. Well, the best analogy we can come up with is if you have, let's say you come from a long line of carpenters and you're in Anchorage and you've learned carpentry since you were 6 years old, you're going to have an easier time making a living off that than if you decide to be an accountant. Now you can, we have schools, we have universities, whereas these killer whales don't. If you're in the high latitudes as a killer whale, if you specialize and learn through cultural learning generations, if your mother and her mother and her mother all did the same thing and you learn that from a very young age, you get very good at it. So good at it that you'll be better at it than a generalist would. Of course, if you live in Seward, or even more so Cordova, you've got to be part fisherman, part scientist, part carpenter, part accountant in order to make your living. So in the tropics, where we don't have as much abundance, in the tropics around the whole world, we probably do have killer whales that are generalists. But in areas like Alaska, the North Pacific, Antarctica, the North Atlantic, these killer whales have to become specialists because other killer whales are, and you're not going to win that game if you're not specializing like the other ones. Here's a brief primer on the Antarctic types. The type A's take very large prey, small whales, large seals. Type B's wave wash seals off. And the type C's are taking fish. But notice that dorsal cape, the gray and black instead of just a black on black. We do see some morphological differences on those animals as well. Harder to tell the difference between our whale types here in Alaska because they tend to look more like the same. To a trained eye, you can tell the difference. If you look at the resident, that male there has kind of a straight back edge and a rounded front to the top of his dorsal fin. Transients have more of a pointed dorsal fin. Offshores have more of a rounded. There are differences. They are not easy to get a trained eye on. Whereas in the Antarctic, you do have some serious differences in size, eye patch shape, eye patch orientation, and dorsal cape coloring. I'd like to give you a little brief primer on acoustics because this is not only my passion, but what I think people end up missing when they're out on the water. And I commend any of you who are carrying a hydrophone, but the underwater world unlocks a lot of mysteries, and there's just a tremendous amount of going on. Sometimes you come across a pod, and you may hear just a cacophony of calls. You may hear echolocation. And if you are near Whittier or Western Prince William Sound, you may hear the AEs, which I don't think evolved from killer whales at all. I think they evolved from aliens. The echolocation you heard there is produced in the melon. There is a cavity in which they can magnify and amplify and even lens. It acts like a lens to send out that signal out, bounce off the swim bladder of a fish and come back. It is said in the dolphin family that with echolocation, they can tell the difference between a ball bearing that is 1/4 inch and one that's 1/8 inch from the very end of a pool. It's been told that dolphins can tell when a woman is pregnant. Basically, they're ultrasounding everything. So they probably know when their family members have a broken rib, when they are pregnant, when they have a tumor. They likely know already if one of their siblings has a fish and is not sharing it, or has a full belly or an empty belly. They make a click and it bounces and comes back to them. So when you hear slow clicking like that, they're navigating or looking for a school of fish far away. And when you hear very rapid clicking, like brrr, they're right on top of that fish, just about to capture it. A couple years ago, we had the good chance of coming across a sperm whale in Hinchbrook Entrance. It's kind of rare, but there is one sperm whale that's been sighted in Prince William Sound a few times on and off, and we got a chance to record some of its echolocation. it sounds like a gunshot. You can actually hear it echoing off the bottom, off the seafloor. And of course, the water there is about 700 feet deep, just south of Hinchinbrook Island. Of course, sperm whales are toothed whales, and so they echolocate just like all the dolphins and porpoises, and so do beaked whales. So if you ever hear the argument, is a killer whale a whale or a dolphin? Well, it's both. All dolphins, all porpoises are whales. What they are, they're toothed whales. So you have your baleen whales and you have your toothed whales, of course, sperm whales here being the largest of the toothed whales. Now, be prepared to die of cuteness. We have a mother's call being repeated by the calf. And here's some more versions of that. So what you're hearing is the mother making a call and then the calf repeating it in the learning process. Little higher pitch, little tintier as these calves are learning their calls. They end up shouting these calls their entire life, the same calls. We want to think of language. We want to think of vocabulary, but for a killer whale, it's very different than that. They're getting a tremendous amount of information from their echolocation, like whether you have a cracked rib, whether you have a fish, where's the fish, where's all your siblings. However, what they are calling with these calls you're hearing now are just family calls. They're running around shouting their last name non-stop. If it were us, it would be like you're playing the same band, same album every single day. It would have to drive them nuts, but they must indeed like it because they keep doing it their entire lives long. And they use those calls to make contact. One time we came across this pod, the AD8 pod, and AD8 herself, Oxlu, was missing for about 3 hours, which is really rare and really unusual. But one of the juveniles was just calling and calling and calling and calling. And you try not to anthropomorphize, but you're going to hear this one shouting out, "Mom!" By the quality of the tone, that definitely sounds to me like the same individual calling and calling and calling. And that calling rate for such a small group is unusual. And for one lone individual to be calling that frequently is extremely unusual. I want to play for you a biphonic call, and these are really fascinating. Just because having two nasal passages up on top of their head, of course, as a toothed whale, they only have one blowhole, but there are two nasal passages with nasal sacs inside, and they can make calls even without exhaling, and they can make two sounds at the same time. And here's a biphonic call from Southeast, from the AG pod. I'll play it again. You're listening for a high whistle and more of a squealy meow. Those are two different frequency calls at the same time, a high pitch and a low pitch. And because high pitch calls lose their energy faster, travel a shorter distance, and are only made out forward, whereas the low frequency bit is 360 degrees, travels further, loses energy less fast, the combination of these two calls at the same time would give clues as to where mom is, what angle she is away, if she's facing the juvenile or facing away. And we have seen whole lines of killer whales all turn like a 70-degree angle at the same time and start traveling the same exact direction all together. And this kind of spatial awareness is unheard of in the animal kingdom, except perhaps by bats. And I want to give you a chance to hear what beach rubbing sounds like. Here's another cultural event that we see the same families rubbing on the same beaches over and over, but different families rub on different beaches. It's a social and cultural event, and we don't know a whole lot about it, but I'm going to play a recording we got from one of our autonomous hydrophones of a beach rubbing event. Hopefully you were able to hear that. But beach rubbing does happen in Prince William Sound and Kenai Fjords, and is somewhat of a family tradition, so to speak. Real quickly, in conclusion, I just want to at least mention some challenges that we have for the killer whale. Obviously, oil. We had 2 pods swim through the spill and decrease in numbers as a result. DDTs, PCBs, PBDEs, while on the decline in our populations of killer whales, are still an issue. In cooking inlet, particularly, seismic noise is a concern. Boat noise is a concern for those of us who are operating vessels. The quieter that we can approach and depart, the better. So slow speeds. Reverse can be very loud. Twisting one engine forward and one engine reverse is super, super loud. So we can all operate our boats slowly and cautiously, keeping noise in mind as these animals are trying to communicate. And of course, anything we can do to keep the health of wild salmon runs, even hatchery release, are causing a bit of concern, with potential for chum and pink swamping the system. Not only escapees to wiping out natural runs, but just the competition for food availability, and of course salmon bycatch. And not listed here, but hugely important, we all know that warming climate, and in particular ocean acidification, may take shells away from important foods such as pteropods and other famous food items for these whales. I'd like to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, I'll let Kelly moderate that. If you have contributed photos that you think would be helpful for us for improving the catalog, then they can be sent to whalesalaska@gmail.com.
Dan, that was going to be my first question is, how much information do you want from citizen scientists, right? We were out the other day and one of our deckhands captured some sounds, or do you want to know, we saw them in Untitled, we saw them, how much information is helpful to you?
Well, it certainly is. Yeah, it certainly is helpful to have. The most important is the date, the name of the photographer, and email of the photographer, because then we can get in touch with the photographer about that event. And any contributed photos, we try and give credit to those photographers. However, of course, as always, we do not want anyone changing their behavior just to get a photo for us. Please do follow the whale sense guidelines that I'm sure you're already following, and we do appreciate that. But if you do make unique observations on behavior, that can certainly be helpful. The number of animals in the group and how many calves, how many adult bull males, dorsal fins you see can be helpful. And a good estimate of how many whales are in the area is often helpful as well. Yeah.
Great. A couple of questions. So this one was very popular. With cruise ship traffic coming to a halt Is there any acoustic research happening this year with orcas to see if there's changes in their communication or behavior?
That audio was a little broken there. Were you asking about cruise ships and the potential impact acoustically there?
Right. Yeah. Since there will be no cruise ships this year, will you be studying it to see if there's any changes due to no ships?
Yes, that is an excellent question. The question is, of course, if we will be able to observe differences by the lack of cruise ships into port. And there's still a lot to be learned about the impact. Likely cruise ships being a larger ship with a lower frequency sound, 500 hertz, 100 hertz, is more likely to impact humpback whales and fin whales and the larger baleen whales because they are communicating using lower frequency, which tugboats and tankers and ferries and cruise ships tend to have. So hopefully we can find some signal there in our autonomous hydrophones. We have some hydrophones out listening all winter right now, and hopefully, and through the summer as well, we'll be able to notice differences. But at this point, it would be really tough to see those differences.
All right. Ben Wilkins asks, thanks for all the information, but I was wondering if killer whales in captivity tend to be residents, transient, or offshore killer whales, or are they just randomly captured?
That's an excellent question. The killer whales in captivity, many were residents when they were trapping them in British Columbia back in the 70s. And then that was eventually banned because they realized that they weren't considering whether they were taking mothers or juveniles or how that was affecting the population. So when it was banned in British Columbia and the San Juan Islands, they considered it here in Alaska. So some studies were done by Craig mainly at the time, and that got shut down. And then they started capturing in Iceland. And those are North Atlantic types, which are not resident, transient, or offshore, but could have been the larger mammal eating type or the smaller fish eating type, which are not actually considered residents or transients because they are genetically distinct from our residents and transients. So the resident transient offshore only applies to the North Pacific. But it wasn't a random capture, but it started off being some residents and then ended up being some North Atlantic mammal specialists. And they can interbreed, they just don't in the wild. They're very socially separated.
Another question, do mothers breed with their sons or sons with their sisters? I mean, where does the breeding come from?
Well, most breeding comes in these giant superpods, and many of you may have seen times where you have 40, 60, 80 killer whales together. One day we had 152 killer whales in Hinchinbrook entrance, and it's during those multiple mix times that you see them all together is when they're breeding. So typically no, and really what we think, these calls that belong to the families, basically they're running around shouting their last name, which is essentially what we call their dialect, and we think they breed with the sexy foreign accent when the faraway pods come by. So it has happened, inbreeding has happened in the southern residents, but we don't think it's common at all. It tends to be quite rare.
Great. Another question, do killer whales bubble net feed?
Well, killer whales don't bubble net feed in the same way we see humpbacks doing it, but they also don't eat herring here. And it does happen to some degree in Iceland and Norway, but not with a bubble net. They do more where they circle around the herring balls, slap them with the tail and stun them, and then they pick off the stunned herring one by one. Not really with bubble nets, but they do herd them up and circle them up, slap them with their tail. And we don't see that behavior in the Pacific Ocean at all.
Great. Well, you have rocked it. You can see from all the comments how much people really enjoyed this talk. So you really make it relative too. So we really appreciate your time and expertise, Dan, and look forward to seeing you in the Sound this summer. And so at this time, I think we've answered all the questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul Tordock, who's just going to close the symposium.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. And thanks, Dan, for an excellent final presentation. The recordings of this symposium will be on our website, princewilliamsound.org. In the next week or so. Remember, back to the beginning, cruise ship on wheels here, so take us a little while to get that up. And I want to say something that the Sound is a unique and special place that sustains a diversity of life. For the foundation that has put this on, the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation, to help maintain the Sound's uniqueness, help us be sustainable. Join us as a member. Contribute to the Prince William Sound Community Forum with your posts, that's on Facebook. And you can also donate to help support programs like this free symposium. We really appreciate it. The whole organization is volunteers, and I've been always super impressed by people's enthusiasm and hard work to make everything we do possible. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And as we wrap up this 2020 Prince William Sound Natural History Symposium, we have a lot of people to thank. Thank you for showing up and sticking with this. I hope it was worth your time. Please email us with your feedback, ideas. We'll be planning for next year's, hopefully in person. Our sponsors are the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation and the Prince William Sound Regional Citizen Advisory Council. And we thank you for them generous support. We also got generous support from Discovery Voyages, Glacier Jet Ski Adventures, PDN Engineering, and Whittier Seafood. Equally important are the people, businesses, and organizations that volunteered their time and resources to this event. The organizing committee, Betsy Oliver with the Prince William Sound RCAC, Heather Tham with the Chugach National Forest. Great thanks to them for being our sort of behind the curtain tech people. Tim and Barb Leiden and the Chugach National Forest. Kelly Bender and Lazy Otter. Pete Denmark and Alaska Sea Kayakers. I don't know who wrote this, but Paul Tordock and Alaska Pacific University. And thanks to the rest of our board members who also contributed with their ideas and support. Deb Penn with Chugach School District, Victor Shen with the City of Whittier, and Victoria Vandersumen. Check out our website at princewilliamsound.org to learn about what we do, trash pickups, Yellow Bag Project, invasive weed pools, campsite restoration, Voices of Wilderness, Artists in Residency, one of my favorite things, a lot of great art that Barb Leiden and write-in that Barb Leiden helps coordinate through the Forest Service, Citizen Science, and again, the Prince William Sound Community Forum on Facebook and more. We look forward to next year's symposium, hopefully in person. Normally we have happy hour now. We'd all sit around and socialize, which, I think as fun as it's been, as well as it's come out, we do miss that socialization and networking opportunities. So we're really planning on next year to be back to normal. But instead of happy hour, I got a brief slideshow I put together with music by Jose Gonzalez, because there was a request to dance, because, summer's here or almost here, and we want to get out and be active. And so get your drink of choice, and I hope you enjoy this music and this slides. It's about 4 minutes, and we'll see you in the sound. So here we go.
Monday, something's not the same. Black head, cross-eyed, sweep the floor. Feel your presence, in your absence, shut the door. Oh, 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 oh.